Before Angkor rose from the Cambodian plains.
Before the spires of Borobudur reached toward the heavens, before the maritime empires of Srivijaya and
Paint, there was Funan, the first, the prototype. A coastal kingdom that emerged from the Mekong Delta in the 1st century of the Common Era, and became, for nearly 500 years, the dominant power in mainland Southeast Asia.
Chinese envoys who visited its capital wrote of golden towers, of vast fleets,
of a cosmopolitan trading hub where merchants from India, China, Persia, and beyond exchanged goods and ideas.
They described a sophisticated hydraulic civilization that had mastered the art of controlling water. In one of the world's most challenging environments.
And then, sometime in the 6th or 7th century, Funan faded.
Not conquered in a single catastrophic war, not destroyed by natural disaster.
It's simply dissolved, its power fragmenting, its cities abandoned, its glory transferring to...
Tonight, we investigate the mystery of Southeast Asia's first great kingdom, a civilization so thoroughly erased that we...
Let's start with the most basic problem, the name itself. Funan is not what this kingdom called itself.
It's a Chinese transcription, likely of the Khmer word Phnom, meaning mountain.
The Chinese historians who recorded the kingdom's existence heard local people refer to their state as something that sounded like Funan and wrote it down.
Using Chinese characters.
But what the kingdom's actual name was, in its own language, we simply do not know.
This is our first clue to how completely Funan has vanished. We're investigating a civilization.
What we do know comes primarily from Chinese sources, particularly the accounts of envoys who visited Funan in the 3rd and 6th centuries.
These diplomats were meticulous observers, trained to gather intelligence about foreign powers.
Their reports, preserved in dynastic histories, provide our most detailed written evidence of what Funan was. And what they describe is startling. A highly organized state controlling the lower Mekong Delta and portions of the Malay Peninsula, with a population potentially numbering in the hundreds of thousands, engaged in long-distance maritime trade that connected the Indian Ocean world with East Asia.
The geographical location was everything. The Mekong Delta, where Funan emerged,
capable of supporting large populations through rice cultivation.
But it's also one of the most challenging environments to control. This is a landscape of water, rivers
that shift between dry land and inundated plain, depending on the monsoon.
To build a civilization here required mastering hydraulic engineering on a massive scale. Funan did exactly that.
Archaeological evidence, particularly from the site of Oc Eo in southern Vietnam, reveals an extraordinary feat of engineering.
The Funanese constructed an elaborate system of canals, some over 50 meters wide, creating a transportation.
These weren't simple irrigation ditches. They were navigable waterways that allowed boats to move goods and people.
Some canals ran perfectly straight for dozens of kilometers, suggesting sophisticated surveying techniques and centralized planning.
This was civil engineering on a scale not seen again in Southeast Asia, until the Khmer Empire built its own hydraulic systems centuries later. But Funan's real genius was recognizing that the Mekong Delta wasn't just an agricultural resource. It was a strategic gateway.
Ships traveling between India and China couldn't simply sail along the coast. The monsoon winds didn't cooperate. Instead, they had to cross the Isthmus of Kra, or the Malay Peninsula.
And the shortest, safest route
involved sailing through waters controlled by Funan.
The kingdom didn't just control territory. It controlled a bottleneck in one of the ancient world's most important trade routes.
And it monetized that control brilliantly.
Chinese sources describe Funan's ports as cosmopolitan centers, where merchants from across the maritime world congregated.
Indian traders brought cotton textiles, beads, and most importantly, ideas. Hinduism, Buddhism.
Chinese merchants brought silk, ceramics, and metalwork.
Persian and Arab traders, though less frequently mentioned in the sources, likely also visited, part of the vast
Funan. Funan became an entrepot, a place where goods were offloaded, thawed, stored, traded, and reshipped.
This international trade transformed Funan from a hydraulic chiefdom into something far more sophisticated.
Excavations have uncovered Roman coins, Indian seals, Persian glassware, Chinese mirrors, and locally produced gold jewelry of...
These weren't just trade goods passing through. They were being used, valued, and integrated into Funanese culture. The kingdom was absorbing influences from across the known world and synthesizing them into something unique.
Funan adopted Sanskrit as a prestige language for religious and administrative purposes, though the common people almost...
Buddhist, Hindu, and Buddhist religious practices were imported and adapted. The Chinese accounts mention that Funanese kings...
Stone sculptures found in the delta show clear and Indian stylistic influences, depicting Hindu deities like Vishnu and Shiva.
Yet Funan was not simply copying India. This was selective borrowing, taking elements that reinforced royal power.
The Chinese envoy Kang Tai, who visited Funan in the mid-3rd century, described a highly stratified society with a...
The origin legend of Funan, as recorded by Chinese historians, is itself revealing.
He encountered Soma, the daughter of the Naga king, who ruled the waters. As a wedding gift, her father drank up the water that covered the land, creating dry territory for them to rule.
Kaundinya gave Soma clothes to cover her nakedness, and together they founded the kingdom of Funan.
This legend is doing heavy ideological work. It legitimizes Indianized kingship by making the founding king an Indian Brahmin.
It explains the transition from a water-based society to a land-based kingdom.
It justifies the social practice of women wearing clothing rather than going bare-breasted, which Chinese sources suggest was an older custom.
And crucially, it creates a hybrid origin, both foreign and indigenous, both the prestigious Indian father.
The legend encodes Funan's actual historical development, an indigenous Southeast Asian society that selectively adopted.
But here's where our investigation hits a wall of mystery. Sometime around the 6th century, Funan's power began to decline.
Chinese sources from the early 7th century mention that Funan had been absorbed by a vassal state called Chen.
And then, almost as quickly as it appeared in the historical record, Funan disappears.
What happened? How does a 500-year-old kingdom, a regional superpower, simply fade away?
The conventional historical narrative speaks of conquest by Chenla, of interior agricultural states. It doesn't account for the archaeological evidence, which shows not sudden destruction, but gradual abandonment.
The great canal systems fell into disrepair. Major settlements like Akio were slowly deserted.
There's no evidence of massive warfare, no burned cities, no mass graves. Instead, we see a slow dissolution. One possibility is environmental change. The Mekong Delta is a dynamic landscape, constantly being reshaped by...
It's possible that the very waterways that made Funan prosperous began shifting, that ports, if Funan's power rested on its ability to control water and facilitate trade, environmental changes could have undermined both.
A kingdom built on hydraulic engineering could be undone by hydrological shifts beyond human control.
Pulse. Another factor was almost certainly the changing nature of maritime trade. By the 6th century, Chinese and Indian sailors
They could make the India-China voyage with fewer stops, reducing the importance of transshipment ports in the Malay Peninsula.
At the same time, new kingdoms were rising along the maritime routes. Srivijaya in Sumatra.
Funan's monopoly on Southeast Asian maritime trade was being broken by competition.
But there's a third, more intriguing possibility. That Funan didn't so much fall as transform.
Chenla, the state that supposedly conquered Funan, was almost certainly ruled by an elite with close cultural and possibly blood ties to the Funanese elite.
The language, the religion, the political ideology all show clear continuities.
What if what Chinese sources describe as a conquest was actually an internal reorganization?
This interpretation is strengthened by archaeological evidence from the temples of Sambor Prekuk in Cambodia, the capital of Chenla.
The architectural style, the religious iconography, the Sanskrit inscriptions, all show clear
Angkor didn't emerge from nowhere. It was built on centuries of accumulated knowledge about hydraulic engineering.
In this reading, Funan didn't die, it evolved.
The political center shifted from the delta to the Tonle Sap Basin.
But the fundamental civilizational package, the synthesis of Southeast Asian social organization with Indic
Funan became Chenla, which became the Khmer Empire. The name changed, but the cultural DNA persisted.
Yes. Yet even if we accept this continuity thesis, something was still lost. The specifically maritime, cosmopolitan...
Later Southeast Asian states would certainly engage in maritime trade, but none quite recaptured Funan's role as the primary intermediary.
The archaeological traces of Funan are frustratingly sparse. Ok Eo, the most extensively excavated Funan.
We have artifacts, beautiful gold jewelry, stone sculptures, remnants of the canal system, but no archives.
Unlike Egypt or Mesopotamia, where we can read the words of ancient kings and reconstruct their thoughts. This silence is partly a result of materials. If the Funanese wrote on palm leaves or bamboo,
stone inscriptions, the medium that survived in India and would survive in later Angkorian Cambodia, are rare from the Funan period.
Chinese sources give us glimpses of Funanese culture that are tantalizing in their detail, but frustrating in their gaps. We learn that they taxed trade heavily, collecting gold, silver, pearls, and perfumes as tribute.
We learn that their kings rode elephants, and that nobles were carried in palanquins.
We learn that criminals were sometimes thrown to crocodiles or tigers as punishment.
But these are scattered details, not a coherent picture. It's like trying to understand contemporary American society.
What we can say with confidence is that Funan represented the moment in Southeast
Asia. This wasn't colonization. Indians didn't conquer Southeast Asia. This was cultural borrowing on a massive...
Funan pioneered this synthesis, and every subsequent Indianized state in Southeast Asia.
The glory of Funan has faded almost completely.
Yesit. Most people, even those interested in Southeast Asian history, focus on the later, more visible civilization.
Funan exists in the scholarly literature, in specialized archaeological reports, but it has no tourist industry, no...
There are no golden towers anymore, no vast fleets. Just muddy fields and occasional brick found. And yet, the legacy persists. Every time we admire the hydraulic genius of Angkor Wat, we're seeing techniques pioneered in Funan.
Every time we examine the blending of Indian and Southeast Asian elements in classical Khmer culture, we're seeing a synthesis first achieved by the Funanese.
Every time we trace the maritime trade routes that connected the Indian to the South China Sea, the kingdom faded, but what it created, the template for Indianized Southeast Asian civilization, that endured.
The investigation of Funan remains incomplete. New archaeological techniques, particularly remote sensing and
As Cambodia and Vietnam become more stable and prosperous, resources may become available for systematic excavation of Funanese sites.
Somewhere in the mud of the Mekong Delta, there may be archives, inscriptions, architectural...
Until then, we're left with a ghost. A name that isn't really a name, attached to a kingdom whose glory is remembered only in fragments.
The first major coastal civilization of Southeast Asia, the prototype for all that followed, faded into history so...
But existence it did. A kingdom of canals and ships, of gold and Sanskrit, of hydraulic engineering and...
Funan showed Southeast Asia what was possible, and then vanished, leaving only clues for future investigators to decipher.
The towers may be gone, the fleets long rotted, the kings forgotten. But the pattern they established...
The glory has faded, but the foundation remains, buried but not destroyed.
The mystery of Funan continues.
And with it, the promise that there is always more to discover, more to decipher.
More forgotten glory, waiting to be found.
The mystery of Funan endures, and with it, the promise that there is always more to discover, more to decipher.
The towers may be gone, the fleets long rotted, the kings forgotten. But the pattern they established, the civilization they pioneered.
Funan was a true marvel of its time, a testament to human ingenuity in a challenging landscape.
Its sophisticated hydraulic systems and bustling trade ports connected east and west, fostering a vibrant cosmopolitan culture.
This blending of indigenous traditions with Indic influence laid the groundwork for future empires.
Despite its eventual fading, Funan's spirit echoes in the grandeur of Angkor Wat.
The story of Funan reminds us that history is not just about monumental structures, but also about the hidden foundations upon which they are built.
We continue to piece together the fragments of this lost kingdom.
Understanding that its legacy is woven into the very fabric of Southeast Asia.
Funan, the first, the prototype, continues to inspire curiosity and research.
Each discovery brings us closer to hearing its own voice, unearthing its true identity.
The silent evidence speaks volumes about a civilization that mastered its environment
and connected distant lands through trade and cultural exchange.
A kingdom of legends, hydraulic marvels, and cosmopolitan dreams.
Funan's influence shaped the destiny of an entire region.
And its mystery remains a compelling call to explore deeper.
The journey into Funan's forgotten glory is far from over.